The following segment is a mock debate produced for educational purposes only. The views expressed during the episode represent neither the official opinions of the Institute of International Relations and its researchers, nor the debate participants.
Welcome to Podcast.IA, the podcast for the Center for Russia, Eurasia, and Southeastern Europe for the Institute of International Relations. Today, I'm here with Giannis Ilkos.
Hello all.
With Stamatina Somaraki.
Thank you for the invitation.
Theoni Griva.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here with you.
Klimis Katsiavrias.
Hello everybody, great being back here.
And finally, my wonderful co-host, Panagiota Chatzilymperi.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation.
Before we continue, a disclaimer. We would like to reiterate that today's discussion is a mock debate produced for educational purposes. The views, which will be shared later, do not represent the official opinions of the Institute of International Relations and its researchers. Additionally, these views do not necessarily reflect the actual views of any of the debate participants. Now, let us continue with today's topic. The United States of America invaded Iraq on the 19th of March 2003, and the invasion ended on the 1st of May 2003. The invasion of Iraq was led by the United States in a coalition with the military from the UK, Canada, Australia, and Poland. And I will now give the floor to Panagiota Chatzilymperi in order to pose the first question.
Thank you very much. There are two views on the US invasion of Iraq. The first is that the operation has damaged the authority of the United Nations. The second is that it has enhanced the prestige of the United Nations as an international organization. How could you substantiate these two views? I would like to hear the first argument from Giannis.
Thank you. Initially, it is of high importance to clarify the rationale of the invasion. Saddam Hussein was evidently a merciless dictator for almost 30 years, who oppressed Iraqi, Kurdish, and even neighboring countries, such as Kuwait. Extensive human rights violations, tortures, executions, and enforced disappearances are only some of the crimes that took place under his regime, especially in the 80s. In particular, some experts even call out the actions carried out against the Kurdish people in northern Iraq in late 80s as a genocide. It is also useful to bear in mind the way that Saddam Hussein viewed the international community. He was the leader that invaded its own neighbor and fellow Arab country because he interpreted the increase in Kuwait's oil production as a movement of aggression, and he even stepped further and annexed Kuwait, declaring it a province of Iraq, back in the early 90s. Regarding the legality of the invasion, no UN resolution explicitly prohibited the use of force under the circumstances that existed in early 2003. In contrast, numerous UN Security Council resolutions were issued against Saddam's regime and were stressing the need for disarmament, the severity of human rights violations, and the production of weapons of mass destruction. Therefore, the actions taken functioned according to the virtue of multilateral diplomacy and boosted the United Nations' ability to implement its decisions. Although we should also consider that the international community in the years that followed functioned in a similar manner and institutionalized the so-called responsibility to protect back in 2005. So it is to say that the international community's ability to intervene and the role of the United Nations itself was upgraded due to the invasion in Iraq.
Thank you very much, Giannis, for your response. And now I give the floor to Theoni for the argument of the second team.
Thank you very much, Panagiota. First of all, we have to say that the war in Iraq can be described as a strategic miscalculation and as the single greatest blow to American power and prestige since Vietnam. We have to remember that on February in 2003, Colin Powell appeared before the UN to prove the urgency to engage a war with Iraq, speaking about the close relations between Iraqis and Al-Qaeda who trained the members of the terrorist group. Although the presentation failed to change the fundamental position of the Security Council, including France, Russia, China, and Germany, Powell succeeded in hardening the overall tone of the United Nations towards Iraq. And so, in March 2003, the United States government announced that diplomacy has failed and that it would proceed with a coalition of the willing to rid Iraq under Saddam Hussein of weapons of mass destruction the US and United Kingdom falsely insisted it possessed. This decision was a decision that the UN couldn't change or hinder from being made. There is no doubt that this particular decision by Washington and London to attack Iraq without a UN mandate proved highly negative for the UN in world public opinion. Publics in many countries seem to have thought that the UN should somehow have actively prevented the invasion of Iraq. The sidelining of the UN by the US prompted widespread criticism, not only inside the United States, but also inside the UN. Many argued that there had been a twin failure on the part of the UN, failure to contain Iraq and the failure to contain the US. All this was seen as a sign of an international system that was insufficiently responsive to the needs of the day and didn't mirror the evolving realities of world power.
And at this point, the first round of our debate is finished. Now I give the floor to my colleague Pavlos to organize the second round of this debate. Pavlos, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And now we will continue with the second round of debate. The question is, many analysts, including the then UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, argue that the USA made a mistake in 2003 and violated every concept of international law. Do you agree with the previous point of view? Did this prove that the world needs the UN, or else the big powers do whatever they want without any control, or that the UN has no substance because the big powers don't need its permission to act? I will now give the floor to Klimis in order to present his argumentation. Klimis, the floor is yours.
The American invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a controversial event that had significant geopolitical consequences. Many scholars consider the harm it caused to the prestige of the United Nations one of the principal consequences of this invasion. Now, I will argue in favor of the hypothesis that the American invasion of Iraq did immense harm to the UN's prestige. Firstly, the UN is an international organization that plays a vital role in maintaining global peace and security. It operates on the principles of multilateralism, diplomacy, and consensus building. The UN's role in authorizing the use of force in international conflicts is critical to maintaining said global peace and security. Thus, the American invasion of Iraq in 2003 undermined the authority of the UN in the eyes of the world. The invasion was carried out, after all, without the authorization of the UN Security Council, which is responsible for maintaining the aforementioned international peace and security. This move by the United States undermined the UN's authority by circumventing its chief legitimizing functions and thus made it appear irrelevant. Furthermore, the American invasion of Iraq highlighted the divisions within the UN and exposed the limitations of the organization's power. The United States went ahead with the invasion despite opposition from several members of the UN Security Council, including France, Russia, and China. The failure of the UN to reach a consensus on the use of force in Iraq undermined its credibility and exposed its limitations as a global organization. Thirdly, the American invasion of Iraq had long-term consequences for the UN's ability to mediate in conflicts and promote peace. The UN's reputation as an impartial mediator in conflicts was undermined by the perception that it had failed to prevent the American invasion of Iraq. This perception made it more difficult for the UN to mediate in other conflicts, such as the Syrian civil war, and undermined its ability to promote peace and security. In conclusion, the American invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a controversial event that had significant geopolitical consequences. It undermined the authority of the UN, exposed the limitations of its power, and harmed its ability to mediate in conflicts and promote peace. These consequences definitely demonstrate that the American invasion of Iraq harmed the prestige of the United Nations.
Thank you very much for your argument, Klimis. I will now give the floor to Stamatina in order to present her arguments. Stamatina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. The United Nations Secretary, as you said, Kofi Annan, declared explicitly that the US-led war on Iraq was illegal. Mr. Annan said that the invasion was not sanctioned by the UN Security Council or in accordance with the UN's founding charter. He then added that the war in Iraq and its aftermath had brought home painful lessons about the importance of resolving use of force issues jointly through the UN. Since 2003, the UN's role in Iraq has been that of a peace builder. The United Nations Assistance Mission for Iraq, UNAMI, was established by Resolution 1500 in 2003, and its role greatly expanded in 2007. Its mandate included supporting political dialogue and national reconciliation, assisting in electronic processes, facilitating regional dialogue between Iraq and its neighbors, and promoting the protection of human rights and judicial and legal reform.
Thank you very much, Stamatina, for your wonderful arguments. And now we will continue with the third round of argumentation. A reminder to everyone listening and to our participants, this is the round where you can either present new argumentation or you can present rebuttal argumentation for your opponent's side. And with that, we continue with the first team of Giannis and Stamatina. The floor is yours.
Thank you once again. The Iraq War in 2003 demonstrated the need for the international community to address the issue of preventing action in the context of the Charter principles and showed the importance of joint efforts on matters of use of force. The United Nations promotes and strengthens democratic institutions and practices around the world. The UN's management of the war in Iraq may not always have been effective. In any case, it can present itself as a neutral actor, while with good diplomacy could mobilize support from a wide range of European and Muslim countries who opposed the war. And now my colleague Giannis will continue.
Thank you, Stamatina. I would like also to reiterate that the issue of Iraq didn't start out of the blue in the March of 2003. The international community tried to limit the damage that Saddam Hussein regime was causing to various people, from Kurdish to Iraqi to Kuwait and so on and so forth. So we have always to keep in mind the context, and the international community tried to limit this damage that I just mentioned. And unfortunately, the UN, except of issuing resolutions, sometimes needs to step in and take some action.
Thank you very much for your wonderful arguments. And now we will continue with the second team of Theoni and Klimis. Once again, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pavlos. The Iraq experience demonstrated that the Security Council is tremendously vulnerable to the ebb and flow of international politics. And somewhere here, it is crucial to remember what the United Nations back then Secretary General Kofi Annan stated about a year after the American invasion in Iraq in September 2004, indicating that the invasion in Iraq was not in accordance with the UN Charter. By sidelining the UN, the United States signaled a new approach. It would look to the UN as one potential source of legitimacy and support. But if the United Nations could not contribute to the achievement of the US foreign policy goals, the US would do it without it. However, the sidelining of the UN did not come without its costs for the US. When it acted unilaterally without explicit authorization from the UN, The United States showed disregard for the principles and benefits of collective decision-making. And now I'm giving the floor to my colleague Klimis.
Thank you, Theoni. Now, about the context. Saddam Hussein was a criminal. There is no doubt about his Ba'athist regime caused immeasurable harm to the people of Iraq, Iran, and Kuwait. However, that fact doesn't legitimize the invasion by the United States and its allies. The international community does have an obligation to support the people suffering from oppression and crimes against humanity, but that support shouldn't come in the form of arbitrary violence committed by third parties, even if these parties claim to protect the oppressed and vulnerable.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to my co-host, Panagiota, in order to continue.
Thank you very much, Pavlos. And at this point, the debate is concluded. I would like to thank all the participants for their very interesting arguments. First of all, I'd like to thank Theoni Griva,
Thank you very much again. It was a really interesting conversation.
Stamatina Somaraki,
Thank you once again for the invitation.
Klimis Katsiavrias,
Thank you all for listening, and thank you all for the wonderful conversation.
Giannis, Ilkos,
Thank you all for this amazing conversation.
and my colleague Pavlos Karagiannodimas.
Thank you very much once again. And finally, we would like to thank you, the listener, for tuning in to Podcast.IA, the podcast of the Center for Russia, Eurasia, and Southeastern Europe. And we will see you on the next episode. Have a great day.